Okay, all right. Welcome, everybody. We begin our six-part series. It's a pleasure to have back Rav Ari Shvat. And, it's always hard for me to find his emails because as you notice, he has his name in Hebrew. And on my email thing,
Uh,
I put an Ari, it doesn't show up because it doesn't recognize the Aleph as an A. But Baruch Hashem, Ari's been living in Israel since he made Aliyah after high school. You're in
right?
Shevet Rayut, no?
Rayut,
Yeah, he's in
Rayut,
I'm in Shevet
17,
Golan for the old-time Bnei
right?
Akiva Knicks, and Ari was a year behind me in Shevet Rayut, and he made Aliyah. That's many years ago, and he's been a big Torah educator in Israel for many, many years. He runs the Rav Kook Archives, which is gives him his specialty on Rav Kook. Of course, an interest in Rav Kook. He's taught at many of the seminaries in Israel and places. He's authored over 150 articles, and he's taught a number of classes before. I think it's been a little bit, a few months. We had him at one of our Yumei recently, so it's a pleasure to welcome him for our six-part series on the thought of Rav Kook for the modern world. In many ways, this is a complementary series. For those who were at Mark Shapiro's class on Monday night, he gave about 10, 11 classes on his new book on Rav Kook, and which was really fascinating. The things he found interesting, and this is going to be, I think, quite different. But also, Rav Kook was a complex person with many, many varieties, areas. So there's a lot to study. And I'm far from an expert, so it's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Shvat, who is an expert on the thought of Rav Kook. Okay, Vakasha Ravari. He grew up in Riverdale, besides Milwaukee in Milwaukee when the Green Bay Packers were in the height, as he said. But I think
Yeah,
your teenage years, you were in Riverdale. I believe your father was the head of SAR. Am I correct about that?
right,
Yeah,
right.
head of
That's
SAR, and then they made Aliyah. And okay, Baruch Hashem. Okay, it's all yours.
okay. So I'm going to make myself the host so I can do the share screen. And Shalom, it's good to be back here. I remember I have fond memories of Torah in motion and the high level of the participants. I was talking with Jay before about the our days being a Green Bay Packer fan. I remember as a kid, Sunday afternoons during the winter was just football, and I didn't want to miss a minute. So I used to turn on the games about 15 minutes before 1 o'clock, and then I would watch the 4 o'clock game from the West Coast. And when I turned on early, I remember there was a preacher. Some may remember Billy Graham. He was a very popular preacher, Christian preacher, and he used to scare me because he was always talking about going to hell. And I used to, turn off the volume because I didn't want to get scared of going to hell. But that's really what we're going to talk about today. How to understand Yirat Hashem, the awe of God in a democratic society where we don't have awe. We don't have slaves, Baruch Hashem. And as Rav Kook always writes, that mankind is constantly maturing and undergoing evolution. So it's good. Nobody wants slavery anymore. On the other hand, Yirat Hashem, being in awe of God, is an eternal mitzvah. So that also has to be applicable. And Rav Kook explains how in the modern world we should look and gain the advantages and the benefits of this mitzvah of awe of God. So let's get into the share screen where we'll look together. I had sent previously the sheet if anybody wanted to print it out. Okay. And Rav Kook writes as follows. This appears in his eight spiritual diaries, and afterwards it was edited and appears in Orot HaKodesh. That's most of the things that we're going to learn today. And Rav Kook starts out, Yirat HaOnesh, fear of punishment, Vadai kodemeti bezman liyirat haromemut uleahava. And when teaching Rav Kook, usually the question comes up, is he referring to the individual or is he referring to mankind? And the answer is always both, because Rav Kook explains that the micro and the macro both follow the same ground rules, which were made by the same God. So a lot of times, in order to understand myself, It helps looking at mankind. And in order to understand mankind, it helps by looking at the individual. So here we're going to start out with the individual, but remember that we're also talking about mankind. Yirat ha'onesh, fear of punishment. Vadai, it comes before, it has to come before, and definitely comes before, chronologically, it comes before awe and love of God. Now, already behind the scenes here, remember that in Rav Kook's time, and to this day, there are certain groups of sects of Judaism, of religious Jews, called themselves Charedim. Charedim literally means to shake or to quake. It's like the Lahavdil, the Jewish parallel of the Quakers. And the Quakers built an ideology, and the Charedim built an ideology of quaking before God. And where Rav Kook already is telling us is that was good for the olden days when mankind was primitive. And just like the individual, I remember our first son, Netanel, the saying goes that the firstborn gets twice the inheritance as the others because you make all the mistakes on the first one. Anyway, our first son, Netanel, once found one of my bobby pins. And as an intelligent kid, he noticed that the electric socket in the wall and my bobby pin could make an interesting shidduch. And he started crawling with my bobby pin towards the electric socket. And obviously, we said, no, Asur, you're not allowed to. But his curiosity got the best of him and he continued. And then we took it away. And then another time, he found something small and he was going for the socket. And this time, it was the first time I ever gave what my parents used to call a putt, right? A putt, that he should understand. No, you don't do that. And even if a child doesn't understand electricity, he doesn't understand electrocution, he doesn't understand death, he understands that he will get a putt if he does that again. And so it is with children, young children. But oy vavoy, it is counterproductive if you treat a 20-year-old as if he was a 2-year-old. And the same thing Rav Kook is writing about mankind. Because when mankind was primitive, God, we're reading about in these parshiot, God did all these supernatural miracles of the 10 plagues and splitting the Red Sea that we'll read about, and revealing himself at Mount Sinai. And for a primitive nation of idolaters, God had to make a very strong impression in order to shock us out of being paganists. But as we grow older and more mature, as Jewish history goes, as Professor Eli Tzur writes in Sefer Yoshua, it is a gradual, slow but sure maturation process where Am Yisrael and the world is maturing, that we need less and less supernatural miracles until we get to Megillat Esther, where God's name does not appear at all in Megillat Esther. Because this is how a parent wants to raise his child. That at first, you don't leave your child a lot of free will, because it's gonna be dangerous for him to cross the street alone. On the other hand, little by little, you want to teach him independence. So little by little, God does less and less supernatural miracles, and that yirat ha'onesh, that fear of punishment, is supposed to mature into yirat ha'romemut. Yirat ha'romemut is awe. And in English, there's a very simple differentiation between fear and awe, because awe overlaps with ahava. The high level of awe of a great, impressive God, it says in the Zohar, excuse me, that yirah, which begins, it's spelled Yud Resh Aleph Hey. The Aleph Hey of Yirah is the beginning of Ahava, Aleph Hey Bet Hey. In other words, even though usually love and fear don't go together. And the Netziv writes this about Ishimo Vaviv Tirau. We have a mitzvah to revere our parents, and we also love our parents. But the Netziv says it's complicated because at on at a moment that they are disciplining us, you have more fear and less love. At other moments, you have more love and less fear, but usually the two don't go together. On the other hand, by God, they are meant to go together. But again, this is only when Am Yisrael and the individual is mature. So again, Yirata Onesh, fear of punishment, Vadai Kodemet Bizman, it proceeds chronologically to a higher level of awe and love, which is really the ideal. And again, God today, as mankind has matured, he does not want to do supernatural miracles. He also doesn't want to scare us anymore, just like a parent cannot and does not want to deal with a 20-year-old like he's a 2-year-old. Aval acharka, afterwards, kasher ha'yirah ha'elyonah mitbaseset ba'adam, but after the proper awe is based in a mature adult, and again, remember the whole time we're also talking about mankind matured, ve'ava matchila lehityashev baneshama, and that love of God is beginning to be take root in the heart and in the minds of the mature adult and of mature mankind. Mirov ziva chochma ha'elohit shemeir ba, from the shining light of the wisdom of God, which shines in man as we mature, and as in mankind as we mature. At that point, yesha yirata onesh. At that point, if you revert to fear of punishment, shenichnesed ba'atzamot, which gets into your bones, ad kedei be'ita choderet, until it actually makes a person scared, hime'akevet, it is a boomerang. And if mankind is ready for a higher level of awe, then that education of farada, of quaking and shaking, is going to boomerang, going to be counterproductive, and me'akevet etit pashtut or hakodesh, and it even stops the light of wisdom and of the higher level of awe and love of God from spreading. Now remember, today I was just talking before with Rabbi Kelman about my father was the principal of different day schools. And when my father would enter the building, everybody would stop, everybody would stand up. Today in the modern world, you don't fear the principal anymore. The principal, I remember, how do you remember to spell principal as a Ikar as opposed to the principal of a school? That the principal, P-A-L, he's supposed to be your pal, right? Well, that's a modern principal. But in the olden days, we used to stand up for our teachers. We had a certain fear, for sure, of elders. And today, as mankind becomes more and more democratic, and everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and Baruch Hashem, today there's equal rights, and everybody has the right to vote. And women have equal rights, and minority groups have equal rights, and children have equal rights. And if so, how are we meant to understand if mankind is already matured? How can we get to that awe in a society which does not have a lot of awe? We don't respect each other. You know, in Israel, we have a problem. People call the prime minister Bibi. And, I educated my kids and my students. No, he is the prime minister. I don't know what people think of Donald Trump. I'm sure everybody has their own opinion, but it is proper to have a certain amount of respect. And the question is, what does this mean in the modern world? So continues Rav Kook. V'gam ken goremet, if we still have that charedi education, that quaking, shaking and quaking education, then it will cause chalaim ra'im. It can even make a person sick. Nafsheim vegufanim. Also psychologically, also even physically. Klaliim upratiim. Also for mankind, also for the nation, also for the individual. And I remember as the son of the principal today, young people, they can't imagine before there were cell phones that there was one phone in the house, and it was usually in the kitchen. And even when my father is the principal of the school, he had to sometimes, there's after office hours work, especially important sudden decisions. And as a hungry adolescent, I used to spend a lot of time in the kitchen overhearing at least one side of my father's conversations. And after years of this, he had gotten the habit of being able to usually piece together what was going on the other side. Anyway, there was a famous rabbi who had sent his son to a more right-wing Haredi education. And in the middle of the year, he calls up my father at night and he says, listen, I have to get my son. My son is reverting. He's has a nervous tic, and excuse me, he wets his bed at night, and he started stuttering. And I brought him to a psychologist, and the psychologist said, "Listen, I know you're a rabbi, and you have to send him to a Jewish school, but the school where he's at is going to turn him into a nervous wreck. You got to get him out of there." And so the rabbi called up my father, and my father just kept saying, we don't accept students in the middle of the year. And to make a long story short, my father is b'chozot an educator and a rabbi, and he realized that, sometimes you have to accept, and it was a very, very good decision. And he became a star pupil and Baruch Hashem, very successful. But what Rav Kook is saying is that if a person is treated in the modern world with slapping your hands with a ruler or making you stand in the corner, and mankind is not there anymore, and parents don't discipline as much as they used to. It's not our topic. Maybe they don't discipline enough. But the bottom line is that education today is not the way it used to be 50 years ago. So, and if you relate to a child today as if mankind is still down here while mankind has matured, then it's going to be counterproductive. He's going to become a nervous wreck, and it's not healthy psychologically. כדי לנקות את הנשמה היחידית ונשמת הכלל כולו, מאותו הסיג של יראת העונש. Now, what is God supposed to do? Because man, on the one hand, we all have free will. So we are ready for a higher level of awe. And therefore, we should not educate our children to quake and shake, to fear anymore. המפחידה ומחליאה נוצר בעולם כל היסוד השלילי. Rav Kook is very daring, and he is saying that God who runs the world has brought around, in order to sort of counteract that lower level of fear that doesn't apply anymore, fira, a heresy, an atheism that is anti-low religion, because that low type of immature, primitive religion is doing more harm than good. And that's how Rav Kook explains why there is a rebellion in the modern world against religion, where Rav Kook is saying it's a good rebellion. Now, some of the people here may be familiar with the famous Mishnah at the end of Masechet Sotah that says that Be'ikvita de Mashiach, at the time of the footsteps of Mashiach, chutzpah yizgeh. There is going to be a lot of chutzpah in the world. And children will have chutzpah to their parents, and students have chutzpah to their rebbes, and in general, there will be a chutzpah towards religion. And Rav Kook is explaining here why that chutzpah has to be part of the redemptive process. Because if it was written in the Mishnah 1800 years ago that there's going to be a chutzpah as we return to the land of Israel and as we have a Jewish state and we revive the holy language and we revive the holy army, then part of the national revival is that we have to rise to a higher, more mature, more modern level of emunah, of connection with God. Va'eres shel hakfira hagasa, and the poison of the heresy that we find today in the modern world. I once saw that an article that said, I don't know what it is, I haven't checked up recently, but this was a while ago. It said, and 91% of mankind still believes in God, inferring that the author thinks himself as one of that 9% who is more modern and more sophisticated, who doesn't believe in God anymore. And what Rav Kook is saying is that to a certain extent, there needs to be that stage of a yirida litzorech aliyah. We discussed and we mentioned also in previous series and also even today that the way of the world is evolution and maturing. But the evolutionary process has ups and downs on the way where the general direction is up. But there are also these downs to prepare us for the next up. Some of you may remember I gave the example in the previous series that because Kook talks about this a lot, that if you want to throw, you can't throw without winding up. The further back you wind up, the further you can throw. And similarly, the lower down you crouch, the higher you can jump. The further down you press a spring, the higher it's going to rise, it's going to jump. And if so, Rav Kook is explaining that the modern rebellion against religion is a good rebellion because it's a rebellion against the old-fashioned, primitive, quaking and shaking charada. Nosab b'yasodo k'dei liot eres negdi. This anti-religion is like the poison, which is coming to counteract the lower, less sophisticated, less mature type of religion. Shel yirat onesh, of fear of punishment. Shehi yoredet mata mata v'niteket miora Torah miyasod yira ilav ava amitit. Okay, which we foreshadowed the explanation. Let us see paragraph number 2. Don't worry, pretty soon we'll get into what yes. Till now, we've been discussing what not. That modern man and modern children are not meant to, for old-fashioned fear of punishment. And by the way, the Torah, which is eternal, notice it does not, almost not at all mention heaven and hell, because modern man has passed that. We today want a religion and a faith and a belief where we identify with God, we identify with the mitzvot on a higher level. And again, that fear of punishment is counterproductive today, and that's what turns people off. Rav Kook, in paragraph 2, this is also from Shmona Kvatzim, Chisaron yesh beyirah mitzad hachitzoni shela. There is a problem with yirah, with fear of God, in its outer external form. She merakechet et halev yoter midai, and it softens a person too much. Rav Kook explains, he actually has a very famous article called Hapachad, where maybe I'll just read one line. Rav Kook writes that the biggest problem in the world today is ein davar ra v'achzari ba'olam domeh lepachad. There is nothing as cruel and as bad for the world today as being scared of God, because you don't like things that you're scared of. You don't like ghosts. You don't like the boogeyman. And if God is scary, you don't like God either. All right, our Father in heaven loves us, and he created us with self-confidence. And if a person is too busy with his charada, his quaking and shaking and fears, he's not going to be a happy camper and he's not going to have self confidence. And by the way, there in the article about fear, Rav Kook talks about why is it such a tragedy for people today to have fear. He writes that fear of new ideas in a world which again is always undergoing evolution, but if it used to be slow but sure evolution, today evolution is with leaps and bounds. And there are some people, in general, religious people, are very conservative with a small c, are very wary of changes. And another word for change is reform. So, Orthodox Jew hears the word reform, he runs the other direction. So, when people started coming up with new ideas, whether it be socialism or universalism or feminism, the first reaction of many of the religious people and the rabbinic leadership was they were scared of these new ideas. And let's keep things the way they used to be. And Rav Kook goes on to say that fear of machshava, fear of new ideas, is the worst type of fear. And that is enemy number one today for Torah. For example, in Rav Kook's time, when Zionism was just beginning, a lot of religious Jews were scared of Zionism. And Rav Kook said, hey, let's be objective. Is Zionism really contradict Judaism? The same thing with modernism. The same thing with going to university. And just like today, there are some people in Israel who are scared of joining the army because it will take a person out of their shtetl. Rav Kook is telling us that if you want to stay in your shtetl with the approach of harada, of quaking and shaking, your children, there's a good chance that they're going to rebel when they grow up because modern man is ready for a higher level of identifying with Torah. And just like, remember when computers first came out, the first reaction in many Haredi communities was Chadash Asur Min Torah, right? Quoting the Chatam Sofer, paraphrasing the Mishnah that says that new ideas, you got to be very wary of them. So they didn't want computers in their home. Now, who misses out? They themselves miss out. So over 20 years today, there is no rabbi in the world, I don't think, who does not use computers in order to raise their learning to a higher level. As a teacher, everyone uses computers that even an 18-year-old can have at his fingertips to a certain extent the bikiyut, the unbelievable knowledge and searching. And there are so many things that a computer can do to raise Torah, learning, and observance. And you have a question at 12 o'clock at night, you just look for the answer. I don't suggest artificial intelligence yet on this point because almost all the times that I've looked there for checked, they've been off. But computers, the Haredi world eventually understood that it enhances. And just like cars, at the beginning there were people who said, no, you shouldn't drive in cars. But Rosh Shlomo Aviner always gives the example that when a person walks, especially a child when he walks, he sometimes falls, but it's not that bad. When a child begins running, it's that much more faster than walking. But if you fall when you run, it's that much more painful. And roller skates are that much more beneficial. But if you fall from roller skates, it hurts that much more. Bicycles, even more. A car accident cars are that much more helpful and beneficial, but a car accident is that much more dangerous. And an airplane, that much more. In other words, the way free will works is that when man is primitive, it was a decision between good and bad. But as mankind is maturing, it is now a decision between super good and super bad. Now, a person, again, that's what Rav Kook writes in Mamara Pachad, He says, if you're going to be scared of everything, like the Masilat Yesharim says, some people, they're lazy and they say they don't want to get out of bed because it's too cold outside. Like I heard in Toronto or the Northeast is a big problem now, right? Other times he doesn't want to get out of bed because it's too hot outside. Well, it's always going to be something, either hot or cold. And a person has to learn to overcome those fears of thinking. And that way we can make use of what Hashem has revealed to our eyes in modern medicine, in computers, in cars, in airplanes. Yeah, of course, an airplane can crash, but that doesn't mean you're not going to fly. Anyway, back to the share screen. Rav Kook continues. So we are in paragraph number 2. And, let's just jump down to the end of paragraph 2 because I want to get to the main punchline. Rav Kook talks about here where I'm pointing out, when the two directions, the two drives, mitavkot zo bazo, when they wrestle, the modernism on one hand and the conservatism, bewaring of change on the other hand. By the way, I don't want to forget to say, Rav Kook, in the archives of Rav Kook, we are situated right near Mea She'arim. And a week doesn't pass by without some Haredim coming in because they're curious about Rav Kook. And whenever I ask them, what is the Haredi take on Rav Kook? They say, well, everybody agrees that he was a Gadol Ador, he was one of the greatest rabbis of his generation, but that he wanted to make changes. And I explain that Rav Kook always went out of his way to say that religious Zionism is not a change. It is a return to the original authentic Judaism. Because all the heroes of the Tanakh, they all lived in the land of Israel. All the heroes of the Tanakh, they all worked for a living. They didn't learn all day. All the heroes of the Tanakh served in the army. All the heroes of the Tanakh basically were religious Zionists. They spoke Hebrew, and if so, Rav Kook is saying the rebellion is not a rebellion against religion, but it is a rebellion against exile religion. And that's a rebellion whose time has come. And Rav Kook explains, Veshiv lev avot al banim v'lev banim al avotam, the famous pasuk at the end of Malachi, that as part of the redemption process, God will return the fathers to the sons and the sons to the fathers. Rav Kook innovatively explains that the fathers have to learn modernism and Zionism from the children, while the children have to continue to learn tradition from the fathers. But if they stay at each other's throats, and again, this is the big problem in Israel today, where you have Haredim who are anti-Zionist in the name of religion, and you have Zionists who are anti-religious in the name of modernism and Zionism. And what Rav Kook is pointing out is that the original authentic Torah is really both. And that is the bridge which is supposed to bridge the gap. But if we don't bridge the gap, we're going to have chulsha, weakness, because again, charadut, waking, weakens a person's self-confidence, kanaut, and it brings a person to extremism. Then anybody who doesn't do things my way, he's wrong, and he's not religious. Sviut, hypocrisy, because deep down, a lot of the Haredim do know that modernism is correct and that Zionism is correct. Virishut, merura me'ever mizeh. So all of this, there's a bitterness. This is the pecking order that we know in that takes place in there's the classic ma'agal alimut of the vicious cycle, literally vicious cycle, of that in lower class neighborhoods with the common scenario is that the father, He has a low-paying job because he didn't go to university. At work, his boss is yelling at him all the time to work harder and faster. And this guy, he hates his boss, he hates his work, but hopefully he'll continue working. But he comes home and he takes it out on his wife, and his wife takes it out on the kids, and the kids take it out on the younger children, and the younger children take it out on the weaker children in the neighborhood. And this is the vicious cycle of violence in classic lower class communities. So, on the one hand, mankind is not going to be a happy camper. On the other hand, Azut, the modern Zionists, they have a lot of chutzpah. And again, this is part of the Geulah, that there's God wants there to be chutzpah in the world, but positive chutzpah, guts. By the way, interesting. I don't know, I didn't try this in English, but one of the best ways of learning what the world thinks, especially as educators, it's important for us to know what the young people, the young generation think, is through Google. If you Google in Hebrew the word chutzpah, the first thing that came up is chutzpah Yisraelit in Hebrew, Israeli chutzpah. Now, you go into the Israeli chutzpah, and you will see that most of the examples are dafka very positive. They will bring that it took guts for Ben Gurion to declare the state of Israel in a 4-3 vote, knowing that 7 Arab armies were going to invade. It took Israeli chutzpah to stage a preemptive strike in the Six-Day War. It took Israeli chutzpah. Everybody remembers the Yom Kippur War, how we surprised the Egyptians when Arik Sharon brought the paratroopers, and they started conquering Egypt. And the Egyptian army, which was already had conquered half of Sinai, were caught totally by surprise. It's the Israeli chutzpah which is successful in high tech. It is the Israeli chutzpah which staged the pager attack or the beeper attack. And recently was publicized that Israel built a factory for drones inside Iran. Yeah, this takes chutzpah. And what Rav Kook is saying is that to run a state with many enemies, you need chutzpah, you need guts. And this is part of the modern world, that you can't be afraid of modernism, of questions, of airplanes, of Zionism, of the army. And a lot of modern ramifications are very clear here. Anyway, let us get to what is positive awe. So we're going to continue with source number 3. This is from Midot HaRe'iyah, Midat HaKavod. Kavod Elohim, the obligation to honor God. Tachat musag ze munach hagvura veharifyon. When we have to honor God, it can be either an enhancing experience or a weakening experience. Till now, we've spoken about how being scared of God and having that charada, quaking, that stifles a person from doing, stifles a person from self-confidence. But what is the gvura? How does this give us davka self-confidence? How awe of God is davka good for man and strengthens man. So I'll give a personal example of one of the greatest days of my life. I had the privilege of composing music, and in my first album, my arranger, his name is Leib Riegler, I told him, I had been composing for many years, and my wife and students, they said, you should publish and record. And it's not like today that every person and his brother has a recording studio at home. In those days, professional recording studios were very expensive. Still remember, it was $100 for an hour. And I told my arranger that my budget is 40,000 shekel. So he told me, he takes this amount and the studio costs this amount. And then he said, we can save by using synthesizers. Today's synthesizers can synthesize really any instrument except for two. He said you need a live drummer, and he said you should take Avi Singolda, who is the number one guitarist in Israel. Anybody who knows music, or even if you don't know music, just go into any album and you'll see the guitarist of every single top performer is Avi Singolda. Israel's a small country. He's in a league unto himself. He's like a Jimi Hendrix type, really unbelievably talented. But I tell my arranger that he's probably very expensive. So he says, yeah, you're right. He's definitely expensive. But in the end, he saves you money because he doesn't make mistakes. And every song, he just has to take one take. So I say, what do you mean he doesn't make mistakes? Everybody makes mistakes. He says, you never heard Singolda. I said, I heard Singolda on every album, but that is, after it's doctored, after it's edited. He said, no, that is really Singolda. He doesn't make mistakes. Make a long story short, I call up Avi Singolda's agent, and he really is very expensive. But they tell me he saves money. So I arrange a date where the recording studio and Singolda are free. And he comes 9 o'clock in a huge van. And anybody who knows parking in Yerushalayim, parking is very difficult. But Avi Singolda is a VIP. And you just tell anywhere, like a recording studio, Avi Singolda is coming, and they open up the gates. So he comes in with his van. He starts taking off 12 guitars, starts tuning them up. And I say to him, no, what do you think of my songs? And Singolda says, I haven't heard them yet. I said, you don't know the songs? How are you going to record them? And he says to me, like, how was it? He says, Mazer, Gan Yuladim. What is this, kindergarten? I have to learn a song? B'kitzur, he really does not need to learn a song. He can improvise, and he improvises a lot better than any other guitarist that I'd ever heard. And his right and his left hands move so fast, literally you cannot see them. And I was in awe. That's why I told you the story. I had never felt awe like, hey, he made my music sound so professional, so good. And I was planning on just giving him the difficult solo parts. And I play guitar, I do the easy parts. I said, no, you play everything. I'm just going to sit back and enjoy. And it really was one of the most enjoyable days of my life. And we got to be friendly. Towards the end of the day, I asked him, Avi, can you give me some tips how I can play guitar like Singolda, like you? And he did. He gave me about a half hour of tips. And that is exactly what Rav Kook is saying. Because when God is awesome, and we have matured from fear to awe, and that awe does not contradict love. And again, I was in love with Singolda, and I was in awe of Singolda. But the greatest part is that Hashem tells me, he tells you and I, that we also have a spark of God. We can be godly. And that's what's called in Latin, imitatio Dei, that Rav Soloveitchik writes so much about. Just as God is merciful, I should be merciful. God is kind, I should be kind. God is patient, I should be patient. And the whole idea is that the greater God is, that means that I and you, we all have unbelievable potential because we all have a spark of God. We all can copy God to a certain extent. So this is an awe which strengthens a person and doesn't turn us into a shmata. It doesn't weaken a person. Adarabah, the greater God is, the more we understand and the greater awe we have of him. And he tells us through his Torah mitzvot how we can and should be godly. Well, that builds me up. And by the way, it's not today's topic, but just in a nutshell, right after God created the world, the first commandment that he gave man, Adam and Chava, is pru urvu. You have children. In other words, you also create worlds, because that's the goal of man. Selem Elokim, as man, is created in the image of God. So just like God created the world, we are supposed to create worlds. And then Shabbat comes around, and Hashem tells us, what he does on Shabbat, he rests. So that means that you and I, if we have a godly spark, we should rest on Shabbat. In other words, this is the high level of awe. But let us get one step further and deeper. Continues Rav Kook, and again, we are in paragraph source number 3. Aval bnei adam, hanifchadim v'nirashim. We're in the third line. But people who are quaking in their relationship with God, umitoch pachadam, and because of their fear, enam samim alev. They cannot bring God home to their hearts. They're just scared of God. Ve'inam me'izim lachkor, and they don't dare ask questions about God because they're told, no, you can't understand. Bigodol hatzior Elohi b'cheker kvodo. V'hatzior atzmo nehapach lehem l'roetz. And what happens is that fear of God becomes again counterproductive. Why? Because we project upon God that how I would feel if I were God. What Rav Kook is saying here psychologically is a couple of very important ideas. By the way, I have a friend, Rabbi Dr. Baruch Kahana, who wrote an entire book about the psychology and the writings of Rav Kook. He was a colleague, the same generation as Freud. And here, one of the anybody who works with young people knows that art therapy is a very common thing today. How does art therapy work? Well, on our yeshuv, we once had, unfortunately, a little boy, 5-year-old, who died of cancer. And it was obviously traumatic for all the children because they know everybody knows Shiloh. And so the school brought in an art therapist, and she explained to the parents what she does. Because the problem is that children cannot express themselves. So she asked them to draw, and they draw pictures. And they were all drawing pictures of dead people. Everyone's dead. I'm dead. My mother's dead. My friend is dead. The Ganenet is dead. And then what she does is she explained to us that she explained to the children, even a 5-year-old can understand, that if our yeshuv has been around for 20 years and we have thousands of children, and out of thousands of children, only one child died, that means that this is not a common problem that you have to be worried about. And why do I mention this? Because children let their imagination, and all of us let our imagination run when we can't understand. And what Rav Kook is saying is that what happens when you let your imagination run regarding a God who you're told you can't ask questions and you can't understand, we project upon God how I would feel if I were God. And what does that bring? Rav Kook says, as if God is tvia achzarit me'etzem shoef kavod le'in cheker, as if God is some kind of cruel, power-hungry body who just likes telling us, asay, lo tasay, do this, don't do that, can't eat this, you got to put on tefillin, you got to wake up for shul, you can't do this, you can't. Because that's the way we would feel. I would love, sitting back on a throne and just telling everyone, do this, don't do that, bring me a steak, bring me a pizza, right? That's how a power-hungry person would project upon God. But the problem is we all know that by definition, a monotheistic God is perfect. And he doesn't need steak, and he doesn't have any needs, he doesn't lack anything. And if so, we know that what we project upon God as if he is some kind of power-hungry being is definitely wrong. But the problem is, it turns man into an unhappy camper and a cruel camper. Sonim ze et ze. Sorry, I got to go back to the share screen. That man ends up hating each other. Why? Because again, it is that vicious cycle that if we think God is just telling us do, don't, then we're going to take it out on the pecking order on those beneath us, and all of mankind is not going to be happy. We're not going to have happy friendships. We're not going to have happy marriages. We're not going to have good relationships with our children because that is the way we're going to relate to children. Do, don't. And again, that is not applicable to a modern, mature world. And what's even worse, Rav Kook says that in this Haredi approach, in this quaking and shaking approach, they always praise God's name, Hashem Yisbarach. May his name be hallowed. His lips, his words praise God, but quoting Yeshayahu, Rav Kook here is saying his heart is far away. Because nobody can love a God who you're quaking and shaking from. So again, to summarize what we've seen till now, Rav Kook is saying that the lack of belief in God is really a lack of belief and a lack of identification with the kindergarten primitive fear of God. And it's good. That's a rebellion which is good because it enables us to develop a higher, more mature, loving, and awe relationship with God. And that way we will be happy. And I like leaving time for questions and comments. I'll just finish off with one last example. By the way, the real punchline is in next week's class because this is really just an introduction. Next week's class is really how to see Judaism and Torah as something beneficial. But I'll just finish off with this the closest I ever felt with being an unhappy camper was in basic training in the Army. I don't know if anybody here ever did Tironut, basic training. And I'm sure even if it was in the American or Canadian Army, it's the same thing. I just did in the Israeli Army. And I'd learned in yeshiva for a bunch of years, and I was 22. And in the room in basic training, we just got our uniforms in a big duffel bag. And in comes a little 19-year-old with a Napoleon complex. Remember, that's people who are relatively short very often tend to have a big mouth to compensate for it. And that was his job in the Army. His job in the Army was in the next 3 months to teach us how to follow orders, period. And he comes into the room and nobody pays attention to him because, it's our first day in the Army. And then all of a sudden he yells, "Hey!" Everyone's quiet. And then he says, I'll never forget his first line. He says, "For the next 3 months, I am your God. I say jump, you jump. I say run, you run. I say you're docked for Shabbat, you are docked for Shabbat." And one of the guys in the back line, you're standing in rows of three, one of the guys in the back line said in Hebrew, "What a chutzpah." This guy says, "I'm your God for the next 3 months." And the commander says, "Who said that?" Nobody is willing to volunteer. So I says, "Well, I don't really care who said that. You'll see that tree. There was a tree about a half a kilometer away. Everyone is to take their duffel bag and run to and back to the tree within 3 minutes." And we start saying that's physically impossible. 2:59, 2:58, 2:57. B'kitzur, we run, we come back late. He says, "What are you, a bunch of wimps? Do it again." And you do it again. And we still don't make it back in 3 minutes. And then he reminds us that somebody who really isn't in shape is going to have to spend Shabbat in the army base with Napoleon. And nobody wants that. And B'kitzur, basic training, it was hell. I'll just give you one last example. For the smallest thing, you had to run as a punishment. We're always doing punishments. And again, the whole goal is to teach us in a modern world where there's no slavery, and we were taught 18 years that I am the center of the world. And then all of a sudden you get to basic training and they say, "Habibi, I am your master. You got to run. You got to do this. You got to take orders." Anyway, at some point, guys start, almost on the verge of fainting and collapsing. And he says, "Okay, you guys want to rest? Let's play a game." Remember in America, they used to call it Simon Says, right? This game that what he says you got to do. But this Napoleon, he liked saying Hamifaked. the commander says, and in the Israeli army, everyone gets in their duffel bag dairy and meat dishes and silverware. And he would say, you guys have 30 seconds to take out of your duffel bag a dairy fork and hold it up at 2 o'clock with your arms up. And everyone's looking. Some of the guys do it. Some of the guys don't find it. They have to run. The other guys have to stand with their arm in the air. And the Kitzur, he likes playing Simon Says with your fleshik knife and your milchik fork, and this at 10 o'clock and this at 2 o'clock. And it really drove us crazy. And again, the whole idea of basic training is to teach us how to follow orders, no matter what. Anyway, when did I remember this Simon Says game? My sister, she lives 2 houses away. She unfortunately had a car accident a while ago. She had a problem with her hand, and she had to do exercises also with the fork and knife. And I came in, and I saw what she's doing, and I said, "Hey, that reminds me of basic training." But in basic training, we cursed the commander every minute under our breath. And here, the exact same experiments, when you do it in physical therapy, people do it with joy. What is the difference between basic training and physical therapy? It could be the exact same exercise. Any suggestions? Let's just analyze it. What is physical therapy that the physical therapist tells me to do something, but I do it gladly, as opposed to basic training, where the same thing I mutter under my breath? What's the difference? Yeah,
Uh, uh,
Rabbi Andre.
yes, well, I'm Italian. One is from love, and that is, oh,
Oh, so that's very important and obviously connected with our topic, right? The physical therapist, you're there out of love, not out of fear. Okay, that's a very important point. What else? Let's focus. What are the other differences?
Might you do it
When you,
equally well if it's optional, if it's your physiotherapist? And
fantastic, physical therapist, I can listen and I cannot listen. In the army, I have no choice. Good. Number three, what's a third difference?
You see benefits.
Oh, right. The physical therapist is very clearly beneficial. And the army, he just wants to teach me to follow orders. In the end, there's a side benefit that will have an army, but you don't see it. Okay. What else? Another important difference is that the physical therapist, she has people in her waiting room. She has her diplomas hanging. She knows a lot more than I do about this topic. So if I have time, I'm going to ask her to explain to me why this exercise helps me. Let's say it's at the end of a session. She gives me homework and she doesn't have time to explain. I am going to do her exercises even if I don't understand, because I know that she knows more than I do. And this brings us to the very sharp question. Listen well. A common mistake that Rav Kook is relating to here is that people think of Torah and mitzvot and commandments as basic training in the army. Do, don't, do, don't. That the God has some ego trip that he likes telling us what to do. But mitzvot are not basic training in the army. They are more closer to physical therapy. And that changes the whole approach. Because if mitzvot are for my benefit and I have free will, God doesn't bang me over the head. He doesn't send lightning to strike anybody who doesn't listen. They are certain things that he or she understands that I don't. So certain mitzvot I understand and see the benefit, but even those that I don't see the benefit, I'm going to do because I know that they have experience. They know a lot better than I do. And there's a general atmosphere, again, that God, we are supposed to be happy campers and not frightful kmatas. And what we're going to talk about next time is how to come close to God, how to be like Singolda. Just remember that. We'll review it at the beginning of next class. But again, the main punchline is going to be next week. We mainly today spoke about what not, with the problem of charada, of quaking and shaking, and that the world has to, we have no choice but to go for a more mature option of awe and love, which overlap. Okay, we'll open the screen for comments.
All right, thank you. Any questions, anybody?
I have a question.
Are they unmuted? I don't know if I
Yeah,
succeeded in unmuting them.
Rachel, b'vakasha.
Yeah,
Hi. So this is the first class?
yeah.
Oh,
It's just the
wonderful.
beginning. We haven't reached the punchline yet.
Oh, that's so wonderful. So I was just wondering, it was a great class, by the way. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
fantastic. I'm
I
glad.
was wondering, so was was Rav Cook really you know, was he against Haredim, or was the majority of his
Oh,
teachings like, was there how much of what percentage of his teachings were like, talking kind of like against the Haredim kind of philosophy of this, strong
okay.
hand?
Fantastic question. But the truth is, it's sort of, you'll excuse me, a sort of anachronistic. Because in Rav Kook's day, we're talking about 100 years ago, there wasn't a clear differentiation between Haredim and religious and Zioni Dati and this and that. And that's today. It's a great question for today. Rav Kook in his time was against old-fashioned religion. He was against the shallow, fearful religion. That he's very clearly against. By the way, did you notice that Rav Kook goes out of his way? There's like a in Hebrew we say shtikaro emet, a very loud quietness that he does not mention the word charedi here. He doesn't want to point the finger. But he says the phenomena of building an ideology out of quaking and shaking is not applicable and not appealing to modern man, and it's going to turn more people off than turn them on. And the way to bring people back is by rising to that higher, more mature level. So he wasn't really dealing with, he himself wore a shtreimel, just like what we call charedim today. But he wants to revive the authentic Judaism, which is basically today what we call religious Zionism. Rav Kook also doesn't use the term religious Zionist because that wasn't around in his day. But that's basically what he wanted to revive. And he said that's what's going to be appealing to other people, to modern man.
Rabbi Shvat,
Thank you.
Oh,
ex-
my pleasure.
a
Any other
question,
questions or
question.
comments?
You assume that the world became more modern, better, improved. Look what happened with Germany, the most advanced civilization, and
Right.
that's where
Exactly. So that's exactly what I related to when I drew with my finger that the general direction is up, but there are a lot of downs on the way. And just like Germany is a good example, where they were very technologically advanced, but they misused it and they used it for bad. And that is an example of, like we said today, everything is not good or bad, but super good or super bad. And they use that technology for super bad. But that, we learned our lesson. And hopefully, just like America took them a while to get involved into World War One, by World War Two, it also took them a while, but they got involved a little faster. And I hope there won't be World War Three, and we will learn from our mistake. But you're right; it's not a straight line. There are ups and downs on the way. Okay, a very good point. Okay, any other? Were there any chats I didn't see? Um,
Yeah, one thing, if you want to take a look about what I
how do I
guess
get
it's the
into
thing,
chats?
what changes didn't he like? You can, not every evolution is good,
Okay,
like it's kind of, some
okay,
things
so
society does is worse. Like I think today is worse than it was 30 years ago. Society's moved in the wrong direction.
Okay, so that's a good example of also, so you can use even the word progressive, which Rav Kook is very much in favor of progress. Progress as a whole is very good. On the other hand, people can misuse it for negative things. This is the same thing regarding the Holocaust and technology. And it's very similar to cell phones. I remember when cell phones came out, everybody was ecstatic, but they were so big and heavy. I remember they used to tear my pockets. And so then they came out with a smaller cell phone, right? There you needed that Yirida L'Tzorech Aliyah. And then they found out that it causes radiation. Wow, that's a deep dip. But then they came out with antennas and cell phones, which cause less radiation. In other words, for every problem, there it is a preparation for a rise to a higher stage. And yeah, just like they say in the stock market, I don't know, that if you have patience, it always things end up evening out. In the end, mankind always the drive of the world, and that I learned together here in Torah in motion with many of you. Orota Tshuva means that it's built into the world that shampoo is new and improved, and cell phones are improving, and mankind also we have free will to take things down for a while, but eventually we will learn how to use each and everything for the best. Any other comments or questions?
Okay. That's it.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you
It was a
very
pleasure.
much. 1 o'clock, of course, is Rav Tzvi Grumman, his fascinating series on Bereshit Beit Midrash. That's for those who haven't come and get a very deep analysis of the beginning of Bereshit. As we mentioned, that's 1 o'clock. Tonight, Mark Shapiro will be starting a new series as part of his ongoing, he's going for 15 years on great rabbinic thinkers. Tonight, he will be beginning Rev Shimon Shkop, the great Rosh Yeshiva before the war. And so that series will begin tonight at 8:30. Tomorrow, Rabbi Shulman will begin his class on Sefer Shoftim, fantastic teacher of Tanakh. Do you know Rabbi Shulman, Ari? He just made Aliyah this summer, and he
What's
was
his
rabbi in
first name?
Toronto.
What's
Moshe
his first
Shulman.
name?
Moshe Shulman.
No,
He
not familiar.
he was rabbi in Toronto for about 10 years, and he's been rabbi in St. Louis for the last 18 years, and he just made
Oh,
Aliyah. He
very
went to
nice.
Machon Lev as an undergraduate many years ago.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, he made Aliyah. Okay, so he's a wonderful Tanakh teacher.
Oh,
He'll be
Baruch
teaching
Hashem.
Tanakh
Yeah.
tomorrow.
All that
He
kavod
just
that
finished Sefer Yeshua after a
uh,
year. No,
you
I
keep
know
attracting
you.
top-rate people.
People who like Aliyah, I figure you have to go and meet him. You have to give him whatever. And so that'll be tomorrow 1 p.m., which for him will be 8 p.m. He did a whole year on Sefer Yeshua. And of course, on Thursday, Shuli Mishkin will begin her series on the who lives in our neighborhood, like the Samaritans and the Arabs and the Baha'i and all the different non-Jews who live in Israel, starting a series. And of course, the regular classes, Yosef Lindell just started the series last week on Jewish music, of course, Moshe Sokolot tomorrow on Parsha and Piyut, Natty Helfgott on Sefer Yecheskel, our Parsha Shir, my Shir on the Siddur. We got a lot going on. It's,
Baruch Hashem.
Talmud
Are they all
Torah
the
day and night. Okay.
quick
All
question?
right.
Are they all the same link?
Yeah, you should register. We send out all the before.
I
If you
did. I
register for
registered.
class, you'll
It's
get a
just
link. You can register for all classes at once, and then we send you a link to all the
okay.
classes, or register for the classes you want, and we will send the link before every class. There are issues with some of the emails. Those have Hotmail emails. The email system doesn't work. It's a long, ongoing problem. But even if you don't, then save what you get from registration. Look on the website. All the schedule of the classes and stuff are always on the website. Okay, I think that's it for
Thank you.
now. But okay, I'm just thinking. Okay, all right, Rev Ari, thank you. Please God,
My pleasure. Have a Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, everybody,
Relative.
be well. Okay, bye bye. Enjoy the snow.